Germany has the highest household electricity prices in Europe, nearly 40 cents per kilowatt hour. And here's the kicker. Over half of that price isn't even for the electricity. It's taxes, levies, and grid fees. The country spent an estimated 700 billion euros on the Energiewende, the most expensive energy policy experiment in modern history. And that's just the beginning. Wait until you see what the next 25 years will cost. Germany ended up with electricity that costs 6 times more than France's and is 6.6 times dirtier. France's nuclear-powered grid pumps out 56 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Germany's? 371 grams. So how did the world's fourth-largest economy, famous for its engineering and fiscal prudence, walk into what might be the most expensive policy mistake in its history? Germany's post-war economic miracle was built on cheap energy and industrial exports. That foundation is crumbling. Industrial output has declined for 4 consecutive years. Energy-intensive production sits 17% below pre-2022 levels. Manufacturing lost 120,000 jobs in 2024 alone. GDP contracted in 2023, contracted again in 2024. That's the longest stagnation since the 1950s. While America's economy grew 12% since 2019, Germany's grew 0.1%. You might be thinking, surely German leaders saw this coming. They did, and they ignored it. Siemens CEO Christian Kaiser put it bluntly, "There is nothing that would speak in favor of investing in Germany." After shutting down its last nuclear plants in April 2023, Germany now imports expensive electricity from French nuclear and Polish coal plants to meet demand. 37% of industrial companies are now considering relocation. That's up from 16% just 2 years earlier. And here's what nobody's talking about. 45% of energy-intensive firms are considering cuts or relocation. 2/3 have already partly relocated. So Germany is caught in a trap of its own making, bleeding industries and jobs. But to understand how they walked into this, we need to go back to the decision that started it all. April 1, 2000. Chancellor Gerhard Schröder's coalition passes the Renewable Energy Sources Act. It guaranteed 20-year feed-in tariffs for renewable electricity, the largest renewable subsidy system in the world. The intent? Make Germany a global green energy leader. 2 years later, April 2002, the first nuclear phase-out law. Germany agreed to close all nuclear plants by around 2022. Construction of new plants? Banned. Fast forward to September 2010. Chancellor Angela Merkel reverses course. She extends nuclear plant lifespans by 8 to 14 years. 40,000 protesters gather in Berlin. The nuclear exit gets pushed to the 2030s. At this point, nuclear provided 22% of Germany's electricity. Renewables? Just 17%. Then, everything changed. March 11, 2011. The Fukushima Daiichi disaster strikes Japan, triggered by a massive earthquake and tsunami. Rated 7 on the International Nuclear Event Scale, maximum severity. 4 days later, Merkel announces a 180-degree reversal, a 3-month nuclear moratorium. 8 of Germany's oldest reactors shut down immediately. Over 8,000 megawatts of capacity gone. Now here's what nobody mentioned at the time. Germany has no tsunami risk. None. Zero. The country is landlocked from the Pacific by about 10,000 kilometers. But it didn't matter. On March 26th, 250,000 Germans protested in Berlin, Cologne, Hamburg, and Munich. By June 30th, the Bundestag voted for nuclear exit by 2022. Over 80% of MPs voted in favor, near unanimous across parties. This set the stage for Germany's dual dependency, renewables and Russian gas. November 2011. Nord Stream 1 becomes operational. 55 billion cubic meters per year of Russian gas flowing directly to Germany. The official opening? Attended by Merkel, Russian President Medvedev, and Dutch PM Rutte. And here's where it gets interesting. Gerhard Schröder, who had just left the chancellorship, becomes chairman of Nord Stream AG. At the signing ceremony, champagne flowed. Nobody mentioned that Germany had just handed Vladimir Putin a strategic weapon. March 2014. Russia annexes Crimea. Germany formally cancels its strategic relationship with Russia. But watch what they actually did. German gas imports from Russia increased from 45% to 52% after Crimea. Let that sink in. Russia invaded a European neighbor. Germany's response? Buy more Russian gas. Economy Minister Sigmar Gabriel even sold German gas storage facilities to Gazprom. 2015. Nord Stream 2 project launches. The German government called it a purely commercial venture. 2020. Coal phase-out legislation passed. Exit target 2038. September 2021. Nord Stream 2 completed. €9.5 billion, built despite warnings from the United States, Poland, and the Baltic states. It never entered commercial service, not a single day. By 2021, Russian gas had reached 52% of German imports. The trap was set. Italy joined a currency it couldn't control. Germany built an energy system it couldn't survive without. And in both cases, the warnings were ignored. With the board set and the pieces in motion, Germany was locked into a path of its own making. But as the 2020s dawned, the foundation of this grand energy gamble was about to crack, revealing a dark secret hidden in plain sight. The former Chancellor of Germany sits on the board of Russian energy companies. He was almost expelled from his own party. He's still not sanctioned by the EU. How did this happen? Gerhard Schröder's timeline with Russia reads like a corruption novel. December 2005. Weeks after leaving the chancellorship, he becomes chairman of Nord Stream AG. Salary? Between €250,000 and €270,000 per year. 2016. Chairman of Nord Stream 2's board. 2017. Appointed to Rosneft's board. That's Russia's state oil company. 2022. After Russia invades Ukraine, Schröder meets with Putin twice, refuses to condemn Russia, gets nominated for Gazprom's supervisory board. 17 applications were filed to expel him from his own party, the SPD. The verdict? Refused to expel him. His actions, they ruled, don't constitute a breach of party rules. By 2024, the SPD signaled Schröder is welcome in the party again. When asked about regrets, Schröder's response, "I don't do mea culpa." The Washington Post called it Gerhard Schröder's sellout. U.S. Congressman Tom Lantos called him a political prostitute. The Schröder-Putin Connection explains the political capture. But in February 2022, the bill came due, and it arrived faster than anyone expected. February 22, 2022, Chancellor Olaf Scholz suspends Nord Stream 2 certification, 2 days before the invasion. Dmitry Medvedev's response was immediate. Welcome to the brave new world where Europeans are very soon going to pay €2,000 for 1,000 cubic meters of natural gas. February 24, 2022, 5 a.m. Kiev time. Russia launches full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The energy emergency hits Germany like a freight train. June 2022. Economy Minister Robert Habeck from the Green Party warns Germany faces a crisis more significant than the 1973 oil crisis. August 2022. Wholesale electricity prices spike to €469 per megawatt hour. For context, in 2024, they'd be €86. That's a five-fold spike. September 2022, Germany announces a €200 billion emergency support package. €200 billion, just to keep the lights on. September 26, 2022. The Nord Stream pipelines are sabotaged. 2:03 a.m. First explosion damages Nord Stream 2. 16 hours later, around 6 p.m., 3 additional explosions damaged Nord Stream 1. Location: near Bornholm Island, Denmark. 500 million cubic meters of methane released into the atmosphere. That's roughly 8 million tons of CO2 equivalent, one of the largest single methane releases in history. The investigation is still ongoing. No official attribution. Now here's where the story turns from tragedy to dark comedy. October 2022. Germany reactivates coal plants while simultaneously planning to shut its last nuclear reactors. 1.9 gigawatts of lignite plants recommissioned at 3 major sites in eastern and western Germany. 4.3 gigawatts of hard coal plants recommissioned. Another 2.6 gigawatts of hard coal and 1.2 gigawatts of lignite had their shutdowns postponed. Do the math on the emissions. Nuclear emits about 6 grams of CO2 per kilowatt-hour over its life cycle. Lignite, 1,150 grams. Germany shut zero-carbon nuclear to run coal that's 190 times dirtier. According to an NBER working paper, the nuclear phase-out led to increased CO2 emissions of 36.3 million tons per year. That's a 13% increase, primarily from hard coal, with lignite and gas making up the remainder. Environment Minister Steffi Lemke from the Green Party in April 2023. The nuclear phase-out makes Germany safer. Safer, with 190 times dirtier energy. Bavarian Governor Markus Söder called it an absolute mistaken decision. April 15, 2023, 11:59 p.m. Germany's last 3 nuclear reactors go offline. Isar 2 in Bavaria, 1,400 megawatts. Emsland in Lower Saxony, 1,400 megawatts. Neckarwestheim 2 in Baden-Württemberg, 1,400 megawatts. Combined 2022 output, nearly 33 terawatt-hours. Enough electricity for about 10 million households. Gone. Look at this comparison. German industrial electricity, 14 cents per kilowatt-hour. France, 8 cents. Norway, 5 cents. German households pay 38 cents per kilowatt-hour, 34% above the EU average. If you're a German manufacturer competing against a French or Norwegian competitor, you're starting every race with weights strapped to your ankles. And remember that emergency support package? €200 billion. That's not investment in the future. That's just damage control for decisions already made. So, if the renewables dream is turning into an economic nightmare, who is actually paying the price for this multi-trillion-dollar mistake? Germany and France started with similar grids in the 1970s. Both faced the same oil shocks. One went nuclear, one went renewables. 50 years later, who won? Here's the scoreboard. German household electricity, highest in the EU at €39 per 100 kilowatt-hours. France, about €25. CO2 intensity in 2023, Germany at 371 grams per kilowatt hour, France at 56 grams. In 2024, France hit a record low of 21.3 grams. Germany was still at 350. Nuclear share. Germany, 0%. France, 67%. Net electricity in 2024. Germany imported 22 terawatt-hours. France exported 103 terawatt-hours. In the first half of 2024, Germany imported 6.3 terawatt-hours from France, mostly nuclear power. Let that sink in. Germany spent 700 billion euros to build a green grid that's 6.6 times dirtier than France's nuclear grid. And now they import French nuclear electricity to keep the lights on. A PwC analysis found that if Germany had kept its nuclear fleet, electricity prices would be 23% lower, about 18 euros per megawatt hour cheaper. France achieved 95% CO2-free generation. France exported 103 terawatt-hours of electricity, up 48% from 2023. Germany, net importer. By end of 2022, U.S. LNG exports to Europe hit 42% of total LNG imports, up from 5% in 2021. European gas prices averaged $41 per million BTU. That's 6 times the U.S. price. Germany traded a Russian bear for an American eagle. So, as Germany dismantled its own energy security, was it simply trading one dependency for another? And why can't it escape? Germany is caught in a structural trap created by interlocking mechanisms that make significant course correction virtually impossible. Total Energiewende investment through 2025, between 520 and 700 billion euros. And here's the number they don't want you to think about. According to a September 2025 study by DIHK and Frontier Economics, the total cost of Germany's energy transition will reach 4.8 to 5.5 trillion euros by 2049. That's not a typo. Trillion, with a T. The breakdown: 2.0 to 2.3 trillion euros for energy imports, 1.2 trillion for grid costs, 1.1 to 1.5 trillion for investments in energy generation, about 500 billion for operating generation plants. And here's the lock-in mechanism. Feed-in tariffs are guaranteed for 20 years per installation. Grid operators are legally required to preferentially dispatch renewables. The estimated remaining subsidy commitment? Between 26.7 and 71.8 billion euros. The 2024 federal budget alone allocated 23 billion euros just for EEG financing. Who owns these renewable installations? Small enterprises, cooperatives, farmers, households, millions of German citizens with skin in the game. Politically impossible to write off. At this point, you might wonder, why don't they just restart the nuclear plants? Here's where it gets truly absurd. Current status: 31 reactors are being decommissioned. 3 are already fully dismantled. Decommissioning continues until the 2040s. December 2024, NBW Director Jörg Michels. The decommissioning status of our 5 nuclear power plants is virtually irreversible. The discussion on the further use of this type of energy is closed for us. EON and RWE have formally dismissed calls to restart plants. But here's what's interesting. A December 2024 analysis by Radiant Energy Group found Brockdorf could resume operation by end of 2025 for less than 500 million euros. That would restore 1,410 megawatts. Emsland could resume by end of 2028 for less than 1 billion euros, another 1,335 megawatts. Total potential? 12.145 gigawatts of nuclear capacity could be restored in 8 years. But Mark Nelson from Radiant Energy put it plainly. Restarting Germany's nuclear reactors depends solely on political will. The utilities refuse to cooperate. Meanwhile, German nuclear experts are being actively recruited by France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Poland. Training new reactor operators takes about 3 years. Supply chains have been dismantled. Parts suppliers left Germany. Germany built 3 LNG terminals in record time after Russia invaded. They signed a 15-year contract with Qatar for 2 million tons per year starting 2026. 90% of German LNG now comes from the United States. Terminal costs? Originally budgeted at 2.94 billion euros, now 6.56 billion, more than double. And here's the punchline. Those terminals are running at only 38% utilization. On solar panels, 95% of solar cells installed in Germany come from Chinese manufacturers. China produces 95% of global polysilicon. China supplies about 70% of Europe's rare earth imports. Germany is 100% dependent on imports for 14 of 27 critical minerals. Germany's energy import dependency? Nearly 69%, above the EU average of 62.5%. Think about what we've covered so far. 700 billion euros already sunk. Nuclear plants being physically dismantled as we speak. And now, new dependencies on American gas and Chinese solar panels locked in for decades. And we're only halfway through the trap mechanisms. A small business owner in Bavaria, speaking to Der Spiegel in 2024. My grandfather built this factory in 1952. My father expanded it. I'm the one who has to close it. Not because of competition, not because of bad decisions, but because I can't afford to keep the lights on. The Federal Climate Change Act of 2021 mandates 65% emissions reduction by 2030 compared to 1990. Climate neutrality by 2045. These aren't goals. They're legally binding. In April 2021, Germany's Constitutional Court ruled the original law was unconstitutional, not because it went too far, because it didn't go far enough. Add the EU binding commitments. Climate neutrality by 2050 under EU climate law. 55% emissions reduction by 2030 under Fit for 55. The Green Party's anti-nuclear stance is a founding principle since 1980. The nuclear exit was the party's major political goal for 20 years. Environment Minister Lemke, halting decommissioning is detached from reality. Green co-leader Ricarda Lang, buying new fuel rods is a red line. Now look at the public opinion. 67% of Germans support continued nuclear use, according to a Radiant Energy Group survey. 42% support building new plants. Only 23% support phasing out and banning nuclear. 71% support continued nuclear use, according to a Konrad Adenauer Foundation survey. 59% believe the phase-out was the wrong decision, according to ARD. The week before the final shutdown, only 26% of Germans supported the decision. 67% public support for nuclear, 0% political support. In April 2024, Cicero magazine obtained internal documents via court order. The documents allegedly show officials from the Economy and Environment Ministries manipulated expert reports to make nuclear extension appear not tenable. Patrick Greichen, Habeck's former deputy, who later resigned over corruption, and Stefan Tito allegedly rewrote documents. Cicero questioned whether Greichen let the briefing document disappear in a drawer to ensure the nuclear shutdown. A committee of inquiry was established July 4, 2024, to examine the decision-making. Habeck denied wrongdoing. Nothing has been hidden. The Economy Ministry called Cicero's version shortened and without context. Germany's plan to transport wind power from north to industrial south is failing. Needed 12,234 kilometers of new high-voltage lines. Completed as of June 2023, only 1,740 kilometers. That's a massive bottleneck. Wind farms in the north, factories in the south. No way to connect them. Projected need by 2050, between 2.7 and 5.9 terawatt-hours of hydrogen-based storage for seasonal fluctuations. Technology that doesn't exist at scale. So Germany is caught in a trap of its own making. But who benefits from this perpetual crisis? The answer leads to a darker, more uncomfortable truth. BASF, the world's largest chemical company. Ludwigshafen is the world's largest integrated chemical site. They've invested 10 billion euros in a new plant in Zhanjiang, China. German plants operating at 61% capacity. Ludwigshafen contributed only 4% of group earnings in the first half of 2024. 2,600 job cuts announced in Germany. BASF's CEO, "Many of our value chains are breaking up as we speak." By the way, here's something almost nobody talks about. BASF's Ludwigshafen plant consumes as much electricity as the entire country of Denmark. When they leave, Germany doesn't just lose jobs. It loses an anchor of its entire grid demand. The grid was built around these industrial giants. Remove them, and the economics of the entire system change. Volkswagen, 35,000 job cuts by 2030. The Dresden plant closed in June 2025, first German closure in VW's 88-year history. VW's CEO, "Some of our German plants are twice as expensive as our competitors." Golf production is moving to Mexico in 2027. ThyssenKrupp, 11,000 job cuts by 2030, 40% of the workforce. A 10% wage cut proposed. Steel division written down by 3.1 billion euros. The German Steel Federation. The entire German steel industry is currently fighting for its survival. Michelin, closing 2 German factories, about 1,500 jobs. Ford, nearly 4,000 European cuts, mostly Germany and UK. ZF, 12,000 to 18,000 German job cuts by 2029. Continental, 7,150 global cuts. And in a moment that somehow captures it all, Eberswalde Wurstwerke, a historic sausage factory, once the largest in Europe with 3,000 employees in the 1980s, closing by February 2026, about 500 jobs. The Economist cited it as a symbol of German industrial decline. 2024, 196,100 companies closed, highest since 2011, up 16% year over year. 2025 bankruptcies, December alone up 15%. Annual total over 17,600, highest in 20 years. Redispatch costs, which is grid stabilization, 2.78 billion euros in 2024. Grid reserve costs, 1.03 billion euros, nearly doubled from 2023. Curtailment compensation, paying producers not to generate, 554 million euros, Total renewable curtailment in 2024, 9.4 terawatt-hours, about 3.5% of generation. Electricity produced that nobody could use. Negative price hours in 2024, 457 to 459 hours, up from 301 in 2023. Already in 2025, over 570 hours of negative prices. Over 20% of solar generation occurs during negative price hours. The system pays producers to take electricity nobody uses while consumers pay record bills. Poland and Czech Republic installed phase shifters at their borders to block unwanted German renewable overflow. A Czech minister warned in 2013 that loop flows could lead to blackouts in the Czech Republic. Germany's excess wind power floods neighbors' grids because north-south transmission is insufficient. Despite the world's most ambitious green energy push, fossil fuels still account for 75% of Germany's total energy consumption in 2023. Germany is now building new hydrogen-ready natural gas plants, 10 to 12.5 gigawatts to be tendered by early 2025. But here's the catch. Hydrogen-ready has no uniform definition. It's like buying a flying car-ready garage. The technology doesn't exist at scale. The hydrogen infrastructure won't be complete until 2032, at a cost of 19 billion euros for 9,040 kilometers of pipeline. And the plants must convert to hydrogen by their 8th year of operation or face penalties. Germany is betting trillions on vaporware. Peter Bofinger, former member of Germany's Council of Economic Experts. We do not have a vibrant digital sector. A large part of our prosperity depends on industry. So Germany finds itself trapped. But who are the architects of this multi-trillion-dollar failure, and what did they gain from it? February 2025. Germans go to the polls. CDU/CSU under Friedrich Merz wins with 28.5%. The campaign rhetoric? Moratorium on dismantling, potential restarts, small modular reactor development. Hope, right? May 2025. New Economy Minister Katharina Reiche, CDU, speaks at the Ludwig Erhard Summit. Her words? The phase-out is complete. The coalition agreement upholds climate neutrality by 2045, nuclear phase-out final, coal phase-out by 2038, no nuclear restart. In July 2025, Germany rejected an EU proposal for 2 trillion euros in nuclear financing. The focus has shifted to 20 gigawatts of new gas-fired plants by 2030. Carbon capture explicitly allowed for gas plants. A 1 trillion euro infrastructure fund approved in March 2025. 11.3 billion euros in subsidies planned for energy-intensive industries by 2030. The hydrogen strategy? Being scaled back. Ambitions outpaced reality. They're not even halfway there on most targets. 5 years to go. Winners: U.S. LNG exporters. Countries with cheap energy attracting German industry. Renewable equipment manufacturers, at least in the short term. Losers: German industrial workers. Energy-intensive small and medium businesses. German taxpayers funding the transition. European grid stability because Germany's problems get exported to neighbors. The BDI and Boston Consulting Group, 20% of German industrial output is at risk by 2030. The IMF's 2024 assessment noted that energy-intensive industries account for only 4% of Germany's economy. The trend decline in industrial output, they said, has not been accompanied by a decline in value added. In other words, Germany is shifting to higher value products. But that's cold comfort when the factories are leaving. The German Council of Economic Experts. Potential output growth of only 0.4% per year for the next 2 years. Best case, rapid grid expansion plus a storage breakthrough. The transition actually succeeds. Base case, continued muddling through. Slow deindustrialization, managed decline. Worst case, energy crisis deepens. Industrial exodus accelerates. Germany loses its competitive edge permanently. Can Germany remain an industrial power while paying the highest electricity prices in Europe and legally committed to climate neutrality by 2045? This isn't an argument against renewable energy. Other countries have built clean grids successfully. France did it with nuclear. Norway did it with hydro. This is about how ideology, corruption, and poor planning turned a reasonable goal into an economic catastrophe. The failure isn't green energy. The failure is German energy policy. If you live outside Germany, this story matters because your country is likely facing similar energy policy choices right now. The German experiment is a real-time warning about what happens when ideology overrides engineering. When politicians make 20-year commitments they won't be around to answer for. When transition becomes a euphemism for, "We'll figure it out later." Watch what your government promises. Check the math. Ask who pays. Germany bet its industrial future on 2 horses, renewable energy and Russian gas. Both bets failed simultaneously. The Energiewende was supposed to make Germany the green energy leader. Instead, it made Germany the most expensive place in Europe to run a factory, and the only major economy actively importing nuclear electricity from neighbors after shutting its own reactors. The trap is now complete. 700 billion euros in sunk costs. 20-year contracts locked in. Nuclear plants being physically dismantled. Climate targets constitutionally mandated. And a political class that cannot admit error. The question isn't whether Germany made a mistake. The question is, can it survive the consequences? And if you haven't seen our deep dive into Italy's debt crisis, check it out. Links on screen. It's the same pattern. A major European economy walking into a trap of its own making, ignoring every warning along the way. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your prediction in the comments. Does Germany course correct in the next decade, or does the industrial exodus become permanent? Let me know below.